I heard it before I saw anything. It wasn't the words themselves at first, but the sound, the kind of brittle, performative laugh people use when they're showing off for an audience. A sound designed to signal inclusion for some and exclusion for others. It carried from the kitchen, light and sharp, slicing through the quiet hum of our home. I had just stepped in from the garage, still wearing my work jacket. My mind a simple ledger of evening tasks. Leftovers, a quick shower, maybe an hour of a mindless action movie before bed. My name is Evan Price. I'm 38, an operations manager for a national logistics company based here in Denver. My life is a complex matrix of schedules, supply chains, and contingency plans. I solve problems for a living. I was reaching for a cold beer in the fridge when I realized my wife, Chloe, had her friends on speakerphone. I slowed my movements without meaning to, a sudden stealthiness overtaking my tired limbs. The laugh came again, sharper this time, followed by the sentence that fundamentally reset the architecture of my world. "Oh, it's easy." Chloe's voice chimed, bright with a confidence I hadn't heard in a while. I control him with one thing: the bedroom. It works. Every single time. I didn't stomp into the kitchen and clear my throat like some bumbling husband in a sitcom. I didn't let the refrigerator door swing open. I just stood there, my fingers still resting on the cool stainless steel handle, listening to the low, steady hum of the compressor and the sound of my own breathing, which had become strangely loud and deliberate in my ears. The pale bluish light from the fridge washed over my hands, making them look alien and unfamiliar. Gently, silently, I eased the door shut before the alarm could chime, and I leaned back against the cool surface of the adjacent counter, just out of sight of the kitchen's doorway. The voices were familiar. It was Kara and Megan, the two friends she'd met in a book club that seemed to read more self-help manifestos than actual literature. They were the ones who always talked about keeping the spark playful and leveraging your feminine power. Phrases that I was now beginning to understand were just sanitized. Corporate speak for emotional manipulation. "Honestly, it's almost too easy," Chloe continued, her voice energized, as if she just closed a major deal. "If I want him to agree to that weekend trip with you guys, I just have to be a little warmer the night before. If he's being difficult about the budget for the patio furniture, I just go a little cold. He course corrects. Within a day. He's an operations manager. He can't stand an inefficient system." It's a funny, chilling thing what your brain does in the first few seconds after a revelation like that. It doesn't scream betrayal. It doesn't immediately feel the pain. Instead, it flips through a mental Rolodex you didn't even know you were keeping, searching for corroborating data. Tuesday night, 2 weeks ago, I said I couldn't make a last-minute dinner with her friends. She didn't argue. She just gave me a tight, bright smile and brushed past me in the hallway as if we were strangers, a chill emanating from her that had nothing to do with the thermostat. Last month's budget discussion. I suggested we stay within the agreed-upon amount for the new patio furniture. She went silent for a full 24 hours. A quiet, suffocating disapproval that made the whole house feel like a tomb. The countless times I had reached for her in the dark, only to be met with a sigh and a murmured, "I'm so tired, babe. Maybe tomorrow." A tomorrow that usually conveniently slipped into the day after. You don't think, "She's betraying me." You think, "Oh, so that's what that was." I didn't need to hear the vapid, giggling encouragement from Kara and Megan. I didn't need to hear their talk about boundaries and self-care. I stepped away from the doorway, my movements as silent as a predator's, and took the stairs 2 at a time, like a man who had suddenly remembered something critically important he'd left upstairs. Our bedroom was dim, the only light coming from the street lamp outside, which cast a single pale bar across the far wall, illuminating a line of dust motes dancing in the still air. I sat on the edge of our bed and stared at the faint, glowing line on the dresser. It's strange. The small, insignificant things your eyes fixate on when your mind is trying to avoid processing something massive. I make schedules for a living. I juggle supply chain bottlenecks. I keep a fleet of trucks moving across a continent through blizzards, heat waves, and catastrophic road closures. My entire professional life is built on anticipating pressure points and rerouting systems to avoid them before the whole network backs up and collapses. That night, sitting in the dark, I realized I had been treating my marriage like a self-correcting system. I had assumed that with enough time, enough patience, enough gentle suggestions to talk about it, the system would eventually find its equilibrium. I thought my consistency was the algorithm for our happiness. I thought my effort was the answer. Hearing her say, "I control him with one thing," was like a hacker revealing a fatal backdoor vulnerability in my own operating system, a vulnerability I had mistaken for love. I changed into a t-shirt and sweats and sat at my desk in the corner of the room, not bothering to turn on the lamp. The house had settled into its winter quiet, the gentle cycling of the furnace, the occasional swish of a car on the wet street outside. From downstairs, I could still hear the distant, muffled laughter of the women who were, at that very moment, workshopping the best ways to manipulate me. I opened my laptop out of habit, the screen illuminating my face in the darkness, then I closed it again. I didn't need to search for answers. I had the facts. The facts were simple, brutal, and clinical. For months, perhaps longer, my wife had systematically replaced collaboration with manipulation. She had been running a quiet, long-term training program, with me as the sole unwitting subject. There's a clean, almost serene calm that comes when the chaotic, confusing pieces of a story finally click into place. It's the feeling of alignment. I thought back to all the small red flags I had ignored, the subtle signs I had explained away because loving someone provides you with an endless supply of plausible excuses. The way she had gradually taken over the scheduling of our entire social life, framing it as her being more organized, the performative affection she would display in front of friends, an emotional tap that would be instantly, icily shut off the second the front door closed behind us. The subtle, almost imperceptible eye rolls when I suggested a vacation or a restaurant that wasn't part of her preferred, more sophisticated world. Her sudden, intense interest in books about owning your power and feminine archetypes after she joined that book club. I wasn't mocking any of it. People grow. People change. People try on new ideas and philosophies to see what fits. But this wasn't growth. This was a hostile takeover. She had downsized our partnership into a simple, transactional vending machine with one-button intimacy that she, and only she, was allowed to press. My phone buzzed. A text from a buddy at work. "Still on for the hike Saturday?" I typed yes before I even thought about it. A small word, but a massive shift. I realized, with a sudden, sickening clarity, how many times I had been the one to cancel those plans, keeping my weekends open, my schedule clear, just in case she decided that we were good again. When had I started living my life on standby? When had I handed over the keys to my own calendar to her moods? Downstairs, the laughter crested again, followed by the sound of the back door sliding open and shut. She must have stepped outside onto the deck with her phone, seeking the kind of privacy she never thought to grant me when discussing my perceived shortcomings with her friends. I lay back on the bed and stared up at the motionless blades of the ceiling fan. I thought about weight distribution, the kind of complex calculus you do when loading a 53-foot freight trailer. Too much weight on the front axle, you wear out your steering. Shift it too far back, you lose traction and fishtail in the slightest crosswind. Our marriage had been fishtailing for a long time. I had just kept correcting the wheel, fighting to keep us on the road. She, it turned out, had been enjoying the slide. There is a temptation, in moments like these, to dramatize, to imagine flipping a table, to rehearse a cutting cinematic confrontation, that ends with a perfectly delivered one-liner. That's not me. I'm a logistics man. I prefer plans you can measure, with clear, actionable steps. So, I made one. And it started with establishing a boundary so quiet, so subtle, that she wouldn't even hear it being built. The one thing she thought controlled me would no longer be a commodity I was trying to acquire. I was simply going to remove the lever from the machine entirely. She came upstairs later, her hair smelling of the expensive, influencer-endorsed shampoo she loved. She placed her phone, face down, on her nightstand. A habit I now understood was less about digital detox and more about operational security. "Hey," I said, my voice perfectly normal, perfectly neutral. She smiled back, a soft, routine, and utterly meaningless smile, and crawled into bed without reaching for me. That used to be the moment a small, familiar sting of rejection would hit me. That night, it was just information. Information is clean. It doesn't ask for an emotional reaction. It asks for an action plan. I didn't sleep much. My mind was too busy, quietly, methodically, redistributing the weight. I opened the Notes app on my phone and, in the pale blue light of the screen, I wrote a list. Gym before work, MWF. Hike Saturday, confirmed. Call my brother about the fishing trip. Book the routine dental checkup I'd been postponing for 6 months. Oil change for the Predat. Truck. New hiking boots. Nothing radical. Nothing a man would ever brag about. Just a simple, declarative list of small things that belong to me. A quiet reclamation of my own time and space, executed without a single announcement. The kind of subtle, foundational adjustments that make a complex system stable again. Sometime around 2 a.m., the furnace kicked on with a soft whoosh. Chloe turned over in her sleep, pulling the duvet tighter around her shoulders. I watched the stripe of streetlight inch its way lower on the wall and thought about something my dad used to say when he taught me how to drive on the icy back roads outside Fort Collins during the winter. Don't overcorrect. Find your line, point the car where you want to go, and then hold it steady. That's what I did. I found my line. The first test of the new system arrived quietly, the way winter sneaks up on this city. One extra layer of cold each day until you suddenly notice the sharp sting in your lungs and the sight of your own breath hanging in the air. 2 mornings after I'd overheard the phone call, she floated into the kitchen with that light, effervescent mood she puts on like perfume when she's feeling confident and in control, primed for a win. I was at the counter, packing a protein shake and a bag of trail mix for the hike I had already confirmed with my friends. She watched me measure out almonds, as if I were performing some strange, unfamiliar ritual. "Big plans today?" she asked, her voice bright. "Yeah, early start," I replied, not looking up. "I'll probably be out most of the day." A tiny pause, a beat of silence just long enough to measure my obedience. "Oh," she said, her voice losing a fraction of its brightness. "I told Kara we'd go look at rugs with her this afternoon. But, okay." The old Evan would have immediately offered to compromise. He would have suggested moving his hike, or trying to meet them after, or turning the whole day into a tedious couple's errand. The new Evan simply snapped the lid on his container. "Hope you guys find a good one," he said. Her smile flickered. It didn't vanish, but it wobbled. A small, almost imperceptible tremor in a routine that had always, until now, been entirely hers. The week that followed was a series of these small, quiet recalibrations. She initiated what I had come to think of as the closed shop routine, a period of cool, polite distance after I asked her to loop me in before committing our entire weekend to her friend's impromptu brunch crawl. "My calendar isn't a public utility," I had said, my tone calm but firm. She responded with her signature move, a complete withdrawal of warmth. Years ago, that silent, icy treatment would have sent me into a frantic repair mode, analyzing my mistake, offering apologies, desperately trying to restore equilibrium. Now, I just did my work emails, went to the gym, and slept soundly. The silence no longer felt like a punishment. It felt like the weather. You either bring a jacket or you don't. The clouds don't care about your comfort. Tuesday night brought the first real pressure test. A client's warehouse automation software update had gone disastrously sideways, and I stayed at the office for an extra 2 hours, remotely stabilizing their network drivers and getting their loading docks back online. I sent her a single, informative text. System crash at work. Going to be late. Start dinner without me. When I walked in the door just after 8, she had takeout containers spread on the kitchen counter and an expression that said I had failed a test I didn't know I was taking. "We were supposed to go by Megan's tonight to see her new puppy," she said, stacking the containers with a clatter that was louder than necessary. "You said you'd make it." "I said I would try," I corrected, my voice calm and uncolored by guilt. We had a dozen trucks sitting idle for 40 minutes. It was $1 million problem. I fixed it. She gave me the kind of tight, brittle smile people use when they're convinced you've just admitted to a crime. Right. Work always comes first. Tonight, it did, I said, meeting her gaze. Tomorrow, it might not. That's the nature of my job, Chloe. You know that. That kind of direct, unapologetic statement used to earn me a freeze-out so sharp I'd feel it in my teeth for days. This time, she just lifted a single elegant shoulder, took her container of pad thai to the couch, and turned the television on, with the volume just a little higher than normal. It was a petulant, childish move, and for the first time, it didn't affect me at all. I ate my dinner standing at the counter, reading through dispatch notes on my phone. On Thursday, she tried the old leverage trick, over something small and domestic. The HOA had sent their annual email about trimming the large maple tree out front, and I had booked a crew for Saturday morning, the only opening they had for a month. She wanted me to reschedule it for the following week because her friend Cara was coming over to shoot some photos for her lifestyle blog in the living room, and she thought the presence of a ladder and a wood chipper would ruin the vibe. I told her the crew was booked and I wasn't going to cancel. The smirk arrived right on cue, a familiar, almost playful expression. "We'll see how much you miss my company in bed tonight," she said, her tone light, as if she were a parent threatening to withhold dessert from a naughty child. "Okay," I said, and rinsed out my coffee cup. She did not expect the okay. Her entire game, her entire system of control was predicated on the chase. It required my active participation, my desperate desire to win back her favor. Without the chase, she was just a woman standing alone in a kitchen, holding a lever that was no longer connected to anything. She had to decide whether to be angry or bored. She chose bored and went upstairs early. I finished a spreadsheet, set my alarm for my morning run, and slept like a stone. By the weekend, the pattern was illuminated like runway lights in a storm. Every time I held my ground, every time I refused to bend to her unstated demands, she would cycle through one of 3 predictable stations: quiet removal and silent treatment, light, sarcastic jabs, or a sudden, cloying sweetness. I had become the system administrator of our marriage, and I had finally identified the malware. Saturday morning, while the tree crew was setting up their equipment, she emerged onto the patio in the silk robe that used to be my kryptonite, the one that could derail any plan I had. From yard work to filing our taxes, she was holding 2 cups of coffee. "I made you breakfast," she said, her voice the soft, intimate murmur that couples fall in love with. "I'm good, thanks," I said, not looking up from the invoice I was reviewing with the crew foreman. "They're going to start in about 10 minutes. Her face didn't crack, exactly. It recalculated. I could almost hear the gears whirring in her head as she processed the new, unexpected data. She tried a different angle, a different approach vector. "Did you forget about that art fair downtown? We were talking about going." "Didn't forget," I said. "I already booked a tune-up for the truck at 1, and I'm planning on a long run after that." My plans were simple boring, and entirely unapologetically mine. That afternoon, she shifted to the second station. Feigned concern. "You've been so distant lately," she said, as she folded a basket of laundry she normally wouldn't have touched. She was using proximity as a tool, hoping it might summon the old, compliant program. "Is everything okay?" "Everything's organized," I said, my words chosen with precision. "Work has been heavy. I'm just catching up on some things I let slide. Things I let slide like my physical health, my friendships, my own goddamn peace of mind." She heard the subtext, even if I didn't underline it. Her jaw tightened for a fraction of a second. Then she let it go with a theatrical shrug that was meant to look casual. On Sunday, I decided to try something I should have done months, if not years ago. I spoke once, cleanly, without emotion. We were both in the kitchen, making coffee, a kind of parallel choreography that couples either find comforting or deeply suffocating. I kept my eyes on the mug I was filling. "I'm going to say this once, and it's not the opening of a debate," I said, my voice steady. "When you withhold affection to try and influence a decision, it doesn't make me want to move closer to you. It makes the entire foundation of our marriage feel cheap." She blinked, a sudden startled movement, as if I had just opened a window in the middle of a blizzard. I don't do that." "I'm not asking you to agree with me," I said, finally looking at her. "I'm telling you how it lands, and I'm not playing along with it anymore." The silence in the kitchen was thick and heavy. The water in the kettle finished boiling, its whistle a shrill, piercing scream in the quiet. Something old in me, a deeply ingrained habit of appeasement, wanted to rush in, to fill the silence, to soothe the tension, to offer a lighter, less confrontational version of the truth. I forced myself to stay still. I let the silence stand there with us, steaming the air, demanding to be acknowledged. She finally broke it with a laugh, that practiced, light, dismissive sound. "You're being so dramatic, Evan." "No," I said. "I'm being specific." That single, clean line ended the scene without the usual messy, drawn-out third act. She took her coffee to the living room and began scrolling through her phone, her thumbs moving with a frantic, agitated speed that betrayed her feigned nonchalance. I took my coffee to the garage, cleaned off my workbench, and put air in the truck's tires. It's truly amazing how many small, essential tasks a man lets slide while he is waiting for permission to live inside his own house. The days that followed were a quiet tightening of the screws. Whenever I held my line, she would invent an audience, narrating my behavior to her friends on speakerphone as if I weren't in the next room. "He's on this new independence kick," I heard her say to Kara. "It's so strange." The first time, I nearly laughed out loud. Independence from what? My own over-accommodation? I put on my running shoes and went for a long, hard 3-mile run before dinner. The air was cold enough to make the inside of my nose sting. It felt clean. Midweek, she weaponized concern. "You seem so unhappy," she said one evening, tilting her head with her signature empathy face, an expression I now knew was a strategic tool. Is it work? Is it me? I was careful with my response. "I'm not unhappy," I said. "I'm clear. There's a difference." "Clear about what?" "About what I will and will not do," I said. "I will listen. I will compromise when the compromise is actually mutual. I will not, however, respond to behavioral tests." The word tests landed with a palpable thud. Her eyelids flinched. She recovered quickly. "You're imagining things." "Maybe," I said, and went upstairs to call my brother about the fishing trip we were planning for the spring. I booked the cabin we had always talked about but never committed to. The old script, the old me, would have circled back after these tense moments. He would have placed a gentle hand on her shoulder and asked, "How can we reset?" That script and that character had been permanently retired. I still did the normal husband tasks. I took out the trash, I replaced the furnace filter, I fixed the squeaky cabinet hinge. I was present. I was a partner. But I was no longer a participant in her game. I was refusing to be steered by a manufactured scarcity of affection. She kept trying to sell me a drought. I had started carrying my own canteen. The following Saturday, she arranged a double date with a couple who thrived on conflict disguised as witty banter. I told her I would pass and suggested she go without me. "It will look bad if you don't come," she insisted. "Look bad to whom?" I asked. After she left, I cooked myself a perfect medium-rare steak, FaceTimed with my nephew, and fell asleep reading a book without the television droning on in the background. She came home late, made just enough noise to register her return, and then climbed into bed without a single comment. The silence between us wasn't cold anymore. It was honest. The pressure began to build differently after that. Her tactics shifted from smug and confident to tentative and probing. She tried a direct appeal one night, sitting on the edge of the couch as if she were about to deliver a piece of bad news. "We should schedule a weekend away," she said, watching my face for a reaction instead of looking at a calendar. "A reset, you know? I'm not against the idea of a trip," I said, my tone neutral. "But a weekend away is just a coat of gloss paint if the rotting wood underneath doesn't get replaced." "What terms?" she asked, her voice tight. "Respect isn't contingent on my compliance," I said, the words coming easily now. "And closeness is not a currency to be spent or withheld based on performance." For the first time, she didn't argue. She just stared at the coffee table, as if the answer to her predicament might be hiding there. The old lever had stopped working. And in that moment, I could see the dawning realization on her face. She didn't have a replacement part. I was steady. I was calm. The man she had thought of as her personal weather vane, spinning whichever way she blew, had turned into a post set deep in concrete. She could walk past it. She could check the direction of the wind if she wanted. But it would never, ever spin just because she whistled. The game was over. The final decision didn't arrive with a thunderclap or a dramatic, tear-filled confrontation. It clicked into place like a seatbelt. One smooth, final motion. I had stopped living my life like a man waiting for emergency rations to be dropped from a helicopter that might never arrive. There were no grand pronouncements, just a quiet, fundamental update to my own operating system. I would not be trained, manipulated, or controlled by a manufactured shortage of affection ever again. The first, most profound change was the subtraction of the lever. At night, I would read on my side of the bed, my lamp casting a low, warm glow, my shoulders relaxed. When a stray thought would wander towards the old patterns of bargaining or appeasement, I would gently bring it back, like a well-trained dog with good recall. She noticed, of course. On the second evening of this new protocol, she placed a hand on my shoulder, her voice a playful whisper, wearing the silk robe she had always used like a kill switch for any argument. I turned, smiled, and asked her how her day had been. A simple, friendly question that offered connection without capitulation. My morning routines hardened in the best way possible. The gym before sunrise became non-negotiable. The quiet, solitary weight room was a relief, a sanctuary. There were no mind games, no psychological tests, only gravity telling the simple, unvarnished truth. I added 5 minutes to my time on the rowing machine each session and logged it in my phone without fanfare. Numbers didn't care who approved of them. My calendar became my own again. Lunch with my brother on Wednesdays. Friday morning coffee with an old friend from the warehouse team. A man who never said much but always remembered your birthday. Saturday hikes remained on the ledger. I didn't announce any of it. I just stopped canceling. The small, anxious flinch I used to feel in my gut when I pressed send on those plans was gone. It turns out that a great deal of what we call anxiety is simply the act of asking for permission you don't actually owe anyone. She tried to pull me back into the old game with nostalgia, The playlist from our first year of marriage would suddenly be playing through the Sonos speakers. My favorite whiskey would be set out on the counter next to a lowball glass. The old inside jokes, the ones that had been packed away in emotional storage, were suddenly reissued. I would laugh at the right places, thank her for the pour, and then go back to the spreadsheet I was building for a cost overrun analysis. I refused to make closeness performative. The phone, once a source of constant low-grade anxiety, became a neutral tool again. I stopped waiting for the buzz that would signal a shift in the emotional climate, the text that would tell me I was allowed to be happy today. I turned off half of my notifications. When she sent me a midday selfie with a caption that read, "Miss me?" I would answer, honestly, in a meeting, call you after. When she sent a calendar invite for a reset weekend, I accepted it with a note, happy to go. Let's discuss terms first. When she went cool after a decision of mine she didn't like, I no longer rushed in to patch the silence. I let normal life fill the space. The hum of the dishwasher, the tumble of the laundry, the low drone of a game on ESPN. The house stopped feeling like a test site and started feeling like a home again. One evening, she escalated to proximity, a last-ditch effort to trigger the old programming. We were watching a movie, and she curled up on the couch, her leg finding mine under the blanket. My body, I realized, had a memory of being rewarded for caving in these moments. But memory can be retrained. When she leaned her head against my shoulder, I let it be what it was. A simple, present moment of physical contact, not a contract. When the movie ended, I stood up, stretched, and said I was heading to bed. She withdrew first, a look of profound confusion on her face. Warmth that didn't come with an invoice attached was a currency she didn't know how to trade. One night, in the darkness of our bedroom, she broke the unspoken pattern. There was no play acting, no manipulation, just a straight, raw question from across the dark divide. Why don't you want me anymore? I stared up at the ceiling, searching for the only answer that wouldn't restart the old toxic loop. I want a marriage, I said, my voice even and clear, that doesn't use closeness as leverage. If that's not what we have, then I won't pretend that it is. She said nothing for a long, long time. By the end of that month, my days had a shape, a rhythm, that didn't wobble every time the emotional ground in our house shifted. I could feel her testing my new boundaries less and less often. Because the map had fundamentally changed, she was learning that I could be kind without being compliant. I had become a man who could walk through his own rooms without asking for permission to feel okay. That is what my silent withdrawal actually was. When you strip all the performance and drama from it, when you stop the chase, when you abandon the scripts, you let your actions tell the only story that truly matters. I am done playing. And without a second player, the game gets very, very quiet. Guilt arrived first. Dressed in the guise of manufactured concern and carrying a large, ornate mirror I was supposed to look into and see my own monstrous reflection. She stood in the doorway of my home office while I was logging the mileage from my Saturday hike and said, with a soft, wounded tone, that she felt shut out. The old script called for me to immediately apologize for my newfound boundaries. Instead, I swiveled in my chair and listened without interrupting until she was finished. I haven't shut you out, Chloe, I said when she was done. I have simply adjusted my own settings. The way we were operating had turned into a constant negotiation for affection, a negotiation I never agreed to. When guilt didn't land, she tried seduction, a familiar reset button, a new perfume, a late-night whisper in the hall. Her thigh resting against mine on the couch while a show I wasn't watching played on the screen. I kept physical contact as just that, physical contact, and nothing more. She would tighten her grip, then loosen it when she realized I was not going to supply the rest of the scene, the part where I caved and gave her what she wanted. You could feel her confusion building. not as an explosion, but as a slow, steady increase in pressure. The lever only worked when I was chasing it. Without the chase, the lever was just a handle attached to thin air. Blame came next, as if a new label would magically solve the old problem. She told me my withdrawal was cruel, that a real husband would fight to fix things, that I was being petty. I'm not being petty, I told her, my voice calm. I'm being precise. I am refusing to have my worth and my value in this marriage measured by a system of scarcity that you created. You're just twisting my words, she accused. I let the accusation hang in the air and die of its own accord. Arguments that require your emotional heat to survive cannot live in a cool, rational environment. Then came the panic. Not a screaming, overt panic, but a faster, more frantic kind. A sudden flurry of invitations to double dates. Impromptu quality time plans that would require me to cancel things I had already booked for myself. A rushed, half-baked idea for a weekend trip to a spa resort. A trip that was clearly designed to skim over the fundamental conversation it was supposed to solve. I heard the speed in her voice, and I deliberately slowed down my own. I am open to spending time together, I said, once we are aligned on the terms. What terms? She asked again, as if the word had changed definition since the last time I had used it. I repeated them, my voice a patient, steady mantra. Respect is not contingent. Closeness is not currency. The first public slip happened at a neighbor's cookout. In a small circle of friends, she made a light, joking comment about how I had been distant lately and needed to relearn how to be affectionate. Our neighbor, Mari, a woman with 3 teenagers and a built-in radar for nonsense, asked calmly, without a hint of malice, "Is that a mutual feeling?" The table went quiet in that specific, polite suburban way. I could have rescued her, jumped in with a joke of my own. I didn't dit. I just took a sip of my beer. Chloe quickly changed the subject to the new grill. Later, as we walked home, she accused me of letting people think badly of her. I told her I had simply let them think for themselves. The most revealing day came when she tried to reassert control with a grand gesture she assumed would trump any conversation. She booked a fancy, last-minute weekend at a spa resort in the mountains and texted me the confirmation with a winking emoji. No discussion, no checking in about my schedule. It was the kind of move that, a year ago, would have shut me up and made me feel grateful. I replied, "Looks nice. We can go once we solve the fundamental issue that this trip is designed to hide." She didn't respond for an hour. When she finally did, her text was a single, slammed door. Forget it. I went to the gym, hit my lifts, ate my standard breakfast, and sent my brother a link to the state's fishing license portal. By the afternoon, the slammed door had cracked open into a long, rambling message about how relationships require compromise. I wrote back, "I agree. I will not compromise on being treated like a partner instead of a subject." She left the message on read. There is a version of this story where a man uses his newfound steadiness as a cudgel, as a weapon of revenge. That was never my intention. I still did everything my name was on the lease for. I paid the bills, I fixed the gate latch, I checked the tire pressure on her car, I mowed the lawn. But I did not participate in reenactments of our old toxic play. That is what finally, irrevocably, broke the game. The panic phase peaked on a Wednesday night when she came to bed late and finally asked the quiet part out loud as a real question. "What do you need from me, Evan?" For a split second, in the dim light of the bedroom, I saw the woman I had married. The one who used to meet me halfway without keeping receipts. I kept my voice even. I need a partnership without performance. If you want me, want me. If you don't, just say it. But don't put a price tag on it. She stared up at the ceiling and nodded once, a small, almost imperceptible movement, as if she had just heard a diagnosis she had long suspected, but had never wanted confirmed. The next morning, She canceled her standing brunch date with Kara and stayed home. There was no big speech. She just folded towels and asked me how my conference call with the new automation vendor had gone. A normal question. A real one. After lunch, I could feel the old engine of her anxiety begin to turn over. She got restless. She almost reached for the old lever of control, and then she stopped herself. That counted. Growth doesn't announce itself with trumpets. It often just skips one toxic reflex and chooses a different, healthier one. We didn't end with a slammed door or a suitcase packed in anger on the lawn. It came down to a simple, unadorned kitchen table, 2 mugs of coffee, and a list I had kept short enough to remember. It was a Saturday morning, the light clear and square on the wood. "I'm going to put my terms on the table," I said, my voice quiet. Not to threaten, but to be clear. She nodded, bracing herself. Number 1, partnership without performance. No more using closeness as a lever. If you're upset, you say it. If you want me, you want me. You don't put a price on it. Number 2, mutual plans. My calendar is not open inventory for you to fill. We decide on our shared time, together. Number 3, we fix what is actually broken, not the optics. No more were set weekends to avoid the hard conversation. If this is going to work, it has to work on a Tuesday night after takeout, just as much as it does in a mountain cabin. I stopped there. I had more, but more just gives people places to hide from the essential truths. She wrapped both of her hands around her coffee mug and stared down into it as if it might whisper the right answer to her. "And if I can't do that," she asked, her voice small, "then we separate," I said, cleanly, the words devoid of anger. "With respect. You will have your path, and I will have mine, but I will not live inside a constant negotiation ever again." The old me would have immediately rushed in to soften that blow, to offer an escape hatch before the silence could swallow the room. I let the quiet sit. It wasn't a threat. It was a description of reality. She looked tired, in a way that felt deeply, profoundly honest. "I don't know who taught me that was power," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Maybe I just didn't want to feel small." "You're not small, Chloe," I said. "You just kept choosing the smallest tool in the box." A week later, she asked me to go with her to a counseling session she had scheduled. I said yes, on one condition: no theater. She agreed. The therapist asked us to list our non-negotiables. Later that week, she apologized. Once, without any justifications or asterisks. I accepted. Once, without turning it into a manifesto. It's been 6 months. We still have the therapist's homework on our fridge. We didn't transform into a perfect couple. We became 2 people who can say no without losing the possibility of yes. And that, I've learned, is better than romantic. It's sustainable. There is an alternate timeline where she chose her old games, where the lever won because it was easier. In that timeline, I pack a bag and leave quietly. I know that version of the story is real, because I kept it in my back pocket the whole time. The option to leave made me honest. In the end, it made her honest too.